work for the Crime Victim Advocacy Council, which was begun in 1989 after a DUI near fatality occurred in our church, the Vinings United Methodist Church. A little girl was almost comatose after a DUI person hit her. He was under the influence of both drugs, cocaine, and alcohol, and she was comatose for approximately 30 days. The church was so traumatized by the event that they decided to set up a crime victims ministry in Atlanta. They took it as a resolution before the North Georgia Conference of the United Methodist Church, and it passed unanimously. It was put into the hands of Urban Action to implement it, Reverend Frank Wyndham, and he gave us a grant, initial seed money of about $10,000 to hire our first director, which was Reverend Melinda Jones. She was the CVAC executive director that implemented a lot of the present day plans and programs that we use to counsel crime victims. We counsel crime victims for several reasons. We believe that restorative justice is really not going to occur until a crime victim has some opportunity to ventilate his feelings, the way he's feeling about the crime, the way he views the victimization experience, he or she. A lot of times they think they're crazy, they're under shock, they're very fearful that the person may come back or haunt them again. They're sometimes angry, almost vengeful, like they want to lash out and get back at the person who did this horrible and heinous crime. Sometimes they are panicked and have these panic attacks. They have post-traumatic stress reactions like not sleeping, inability to think, snappiness. They just snap at people that they didn't used to lash out at. These kinds of symptoms are treatable, and we feel like a support group setting with other crime victims who are, some are in recovery and are doing well after several years, some are in the middle parts of their recovery, and some are very new and fresh crime victim survivors who have just experienced the murder or the DUI fatality or the rape or the assault. So we're working with a number of people in this group, but in this group, the group is trying to help each other. They're trying to support, counsel, work with, and help each other. We feel like that's an important therapeutic principle. It's the old AA or 12-step model of paraprofessionals. We're all paraprofessionals here, each one helping our fellow person who is suffering. Restorative justice has too long focused on the offender. We need more of a victim-centered model that takes into account the victim first and then begins to see how the criminal justice system is relating to that victim, how the church, the family, the friends are relating to that crime victim, how the person is himself relating to his own or her own victimization. And then it's kind of a four-pronged effort. There is the government, there is the community, there is the victim, and there is the offender. They're all interrelated, and they all have to work at a restorative principle, which is, instead of punishment, it's not just an eye for an eye, it's more, how do you get the person who did this heinous act to take personal responsibility for what they did? How do you get them to write a letter of apology or be remorseful or repent and be sorry for the terrible crime that they have foisted upon innocent people? How do you get that person in a prison environment to begin to pay restitution to a victims of crime fund in such a way that he feels he's paying back or making amends for what he did? Or how do you get a person, say, at a minimum security camp to volunteer to go out and help Habitat for Humanity or elderly women's homes that need to be repaired, and they would go out and then fix the community because the community peace has been harmed by the crime itself. In fact, the entire nature and fabric of our society has been torn apart by the murder or the rape or the assault. And we have to give opportunities for the offender to then come back and take some personal responsibility, be remorseful, repent, and then make amends. And we don't create that in a normal prison environment. Prison chaplains who are providing a number of programs, very excellent Bible studies, chapel programs, counseling, grief counseling for families of inmates and inmates who are experiencing a death of a loved one. but we are not getting to the offender in such a way that he or she is taking responsibility for that crime. We're still hearing in prisons that somebody made me do it, the drug made me do it, some other person made me do it, instead of the person himself or herself taking personal responsibility for that crime. We can utilize prison chaplains in ways that we've never utilized them before. We can use prison chaplains to preach sermons that preach personal responsibility for the person who actually committed the crime, to accept the responsibility and to ask for forgiveness and to ask for the person who he harmed to forgive him because he is remorseful and repents, and not for purposes of an angle, not for purposes of getting a parole date or getting a sentence change or modification or reduction, but for purposes of true and genuine remorse for the terrible, horrible crime that person committed. Prison chaplains can help in that regard. They can create programs like Victims Come Into the Prison and share their victimization experiences. They're called victim impact panels. They can take prisoners out in minimum custody and in county jails and in correctional minimum security facilities and help the community repair the harm that's been done by fixing the community, cleaning the roads, doing some kind of volunteer work for the government, Habitat for Humanity, fixing elderly widows' homes like we did in Atlanta at the federal prison camp for years. Approximately 40 homes were rebuilt by 130 inmates who went out in church vans to repair those elderly widows' homes. And the whole program was a win-win situation. The elderly widows got a clapboard house completely renovated for cold winters and enabled them to stay there. The community felt better because something was fixed. A community problem was fixed. The inmates felt better because they were able to fix that problem. And their time was constructive because it wasn't just a waste of prison time. They were doing something positive to better society. That loop involves the government, which is the prison, the community, which is the churches, the victims, who are the ones who are specifically hurt and harmed, and then the offender. All of that has to be restorative about the way in which the process works. It has to start with the victim first. The victim has to be central. The victim of that horrible crime has to be the very one that the criminal justice system focuses on throughout the system. That person has to be treated with dignity and respect throughout the entire system. From getting the victim's rights, getting victim impact statements done correctly and prepared right, getting the right of allocution to appear before that sentencing judge, before that parole board, and make verbal statements as well as written statements, to be able to do a victim impact statement update that talks about now 2 years later after the original victim impact statement was done about what additional harm, what injuries, what suffering, what counseling has been required. These are kinds of things that means that we have to start with the victim of a crime, and it should be really turned around from the way it now starts. It starts with the offender. And it's offender-based tracking systems that we're all used to in police, court, and correctional environments. We're not used to victim-based tracking, victim-centered operations that treat the victim always with respect and dignity and counseling that person, giving them their rights, affording them their rights, notifying them of an offender's release and parole if they request it in writing. That's why restorative justice needs to be turned on its head. It actually needs to come back to being victim-specific first, and then from that move out to government, community, and offenders for it to work. For too long, we focused on prisons and prisoners. We've been willing to go into prisons and minister to prisoners, but we have not been willing to minister to crime victims in our own churches. It's because the churches are so spread out, and one victim is in each church all over the place. That's why the Crime Victim Advocacy Council was formed, to create a venue or an avenue to get several crime victims from all over Atlanta to come together and congregate in groups where they could share and pray and care about each other. Because that's where the healing of the heart, the broken heart, is going to occur.